Gwendolyn Sterk, and I am very honored to have with me today Caitlin Suerth. She's a family and marriage therapist in Mokena, Illinois. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. I'm glad to be able to make inquiries of you because I think you can really benefit a lot of our listeners and people that, are able to take the time to listen today. We'd like to talk about misconceptions and benefits of couples counseling because I think that people know that there can be some benefits, but I also think they don't have a true picture of what it is. And given that's your occupation, tell us a little bit about what that encompasses.
Well, I think a lot of times people think that if you're initially coming to therapy, that there has to be a problem. And I think that's a huge misconception because a lot of people come to therapy from a preventative standpoint. They want to get to know themselves better. They want to get to know their relationship with their partners better. They're noticing that there's some things going on with their kids that they're just, wanting to make sure that everything's where it needs to be and that they're healthy and that they're coming to them and they have a good flow of communication. I think that misconception is that there's a problem and it needs to be fixed. That's not necessarily the therapist's job is to fix anybody in a sense, or that anybody's necessarily broken from that standpoint, but more or less, how can we enhance the relationship? How can you better get to know yourself in a sense as well? I definitely look at it from more of a preventative standpoint.
And I think that's really interesting because, a lot of times, especially in divorce, they say, well, I want to make that last ditch effort at counseling. And that's great. If that's where they're at and they haven't been to counseling before, they certainly should try counseling at that point. But it doesn't have to be that last ditch effort, does it?
No, not at all. It could be something that actually I've seen in more cases than not, where it is a great tool for people to get to know themselves better, just in general, and then they can relate to each other. So a lot of times, what you'll find what happens from the marriage therapist and is we start to diving into some of the things that they've got going on as a couple, and then slowly but surely they realize, what, I think I need a little bit of individual therapy on top of couples or marriage family, because there's some stuff that's starting to resurface for me, whether it's from their past or childhood or other traumas and what have you. So that we kind of do a little bit of both at times, where we'll have that separated sessions and then we'll come back and work on things. So you kind of have multiple treatment plans going on at the same time. Some therapists, by all means, think that that's, too much for one family to kind of delve into, or that they need to see another therapist for their individual and have their couples. I can see that frame of mind and that way of thinking too. I look at it more as if the person knows you individually, can help you systemically as a marriage or a couple, and help with the kids at the same time. I feel like you've got a one-stop shop where everybody's on the same page, and you typically have a little bit more of effective treatment come out of that.
Sure. I think a lot of people, they come in and they say, well, this was the result, or my spouse did X, Y, or Z, if they're coming in from a family law perspective. And I often stop and I say to people, you just didn't arrive at that conclusion event. It took a long time to get there. And I think communication is where it starts to break down early on. Would you agree with that that's the key to the relationship?
I would agree that it is a huge component. We've got other components we're looking at in terms of trust, reliability, yes, but communication is huge with that. Some of the biggest things that you'll see right off the bat is major issues with trust in a relationship or resentment. So like you had just stated, that's resentment doesn't just come up out of nowhere. That it's almost like the snowball effect that just keeps growing and growing until somebody kind of gets to that pivotal moment. Is this going to work? Is this not? And that's kind of where you have the last ditch effort. Well, let's go to therapy because that's going to be the straw that either makes it or breaks it here.
So then what I think I'm hearing is that if you're having communication, trust issues, whatever that might be, you need to immediately get help with that and get into counseling so you can work through those issues before that effect, so to speak, takes place. Would that be true?
Absolutely. That definitely can be a preventative standpoint. And then that can also lead into what are we showing our kids? What's going on in the family, the household dynamics? Because let's be honest, all kids that's the first relationship that they are viewing. So if all they know is this unhealthy relationship or two parents that don't talk at all and they avoid each other, what is that teaching your kids?
Right. I think a lot of people, they'll feel paralyzed by that first step. What would you say to somebody who's there saying, I get it. You're not communicating like we have. The last year has been really rough. How do we take that first step? What should people be doing? What should they be thinking about? And how do they broach the subject, in your opinion?
Well, I think people really need to start looking more at where are we at, the reality of it, and what's potentially our outcomes. putting everything on the table. What are our options? And to do nothing is an option,
Sure.
and maintain the same level that you've been. What could get worse? What can get better? But I think more people are afraid of the initial change. If we start digging up that stuff from the past or events that took place that have injured this relationship, what is it going to take to repair it? And I think it's that transitional piece of what is it going to take that people are more so scared of than anything. I think that if somebody were to come into therapy, open-minded and ready to just put it out there and expose themselves, that's going to be their best bet. But I do understand that level of vulnerability is hard. It's not always a fun experience. I try to keep it kind of light in the beginning, try to get a feel for what, individuals are putting out there. Does it match? Is it completely incongruent? And if it is, how do we get to some level of normalcy where both stories kind of become enmeshed a little bit? And that's really what I'm looking for. Is it what are some common ground things that you're coming into therapy that you both identify as problems, not just the he said, she said, or, what have you.
Sure, because there was something that drew you together in the first place. So the issue is finding that and opening that back up. But I do agree with you that vulnerability and the fear of all that, of opening up, becomes such a barrier for people. But I would encourage anybody listening is you've got to take that first step. You can't wait till the consequence of ignoring it comes into place. Because I often find, we live in a state today that really is a no-fault divorce state. I mean, we really don't have any grounds for it. And people don't focus on it until that happens. And they say, well, why was it me? And I want to say to people, before it becomes you, start working on it. Because it's not, and correct me if I'm wrong, you don't have to have a problem to go to counseling. It's just a matter of keeping good communication. Would you agree?
I would totally agree. I wish that we could just make a sign of that just tells everybody that it's not problem focused always. And every therapist is a little bit different based off of their theoretical orientation. Mine is definitely more solution focused. Mm-hmm. You're going to find situations with families and couples where, take infidelity for a situation. It occurred. Yes, we will process it and process it again and again. But at some point, you're going to have to figure out, do I want to stay stuck in this, or do I want to move forward? And what does that look like?
Right.
And then kind of go through the level of, what kind of hard work is that going to be? What's the, if you start to regress a little bit, what do we need to do to keep moving forward? Those lines of communication. Every relationship to me can be repaired to an extent. But and I'm in the business for saving relationships, just like a dentist in the business for saving teeth. However, there are times where things aren't salvageable, and that's not my decision to make. That would be the individual or the couples to decide that. But then we kind of figure out what would need to happen at that point moving forward from a litigious standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, and just try to make that as comfortable and as easy. I mean, obviously, in a situation like that, you're going to kind of have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Right. That's the basis of therapy in a nutshell. But at the end, there's definitely a greater chance that you're going to have a more successful outcome than you would with being, I've never had somebody come out of therapy being traumatized or having a completely negative experience.
I think that the whole concept is resolution, and the resolution is, you're right, it's the individual's choice. And sometimes that resolution is to stay in and stay committed. Sometimes the resolution is the marriage is over. Sometimes the resolution is let's wait and see if these tools that you're learning in therapy are really working. Because it really is, I appreciate the word solution driven, because I think people sometimes think that you're just there to live in the past. And that's not true. There are methodologies and solutions that you can give to people and to help point them to skills that they can use to better communicate, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, the famous I versus you statements, I statements are going to be the ones that are conflict reducing. They're going to be the ones that take ownership versus, well, you did this, or you made me feel this way, which are attacking and they're intrusive. So just a simple communication tool like that diffuses situations and allow better avenues for couples and families, even kids. If you teach them that from a young age, I tell them that all the time. I'm like, these will be skills that you will use through high school and college as an adult with, family, friends, coworkers, all types of relationships.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking you can use it at work as much as you can use it at home.
Absolutely.
The other issue is that, we think of therapy as an in and out thing, but really there's relationships take maintenance. So can you talk a little bit about that and what tools you think people should consider?
Absolutely. I think that, like I said before, from a preventative standpoint, anytime that there's anything preventative, our cars, our health, our teeth, what have you, we always want to kind of maintain that. It's the same thing with therapy. Like I said before, typically people come in and they're in a state of chaos or it's a last ditch effort. But then once you start getting them to a healthier state individually or as a couple and family, you'll find that maybe, some of those heightened things from here, we've now taken it to here and now it's kind of here and we're just coasting along. I always tell couples and families, I think it's great if you can even, maybe we don't need to see each other weekly anymore. Maybe not even bi-weekly. Maybe you come in quarterly every year and we just do a family session. We see if there's anything's going on that's causing any discomfort for anybody or trauma for anybody, or even if somebody has some residual stuff that's going on from previous sessions that never really got resolved.
It sounds to me like these are kind of like checkups. Would that be a fair statement?
At times, once the couple has kind of gone through and completed clinically on our end the treatment plan and we've kind of closed that chapter, there's things that you still want to touch up on. And that's where the checkup or the maintenance comes into place. I personally feel that a lot of couples do well when they do come in and do the checkups because it allows them to talk about things when they're not heightened at that point. They may come in and they're like, we're here because we just want to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to stay on the same track that we were 2 or 3 months ago. And then someone might say, well, this has been kind of bothering me. I want to discuss this. And they're in such a better place to be able to do that. And therapy is kind of like their safe place.
Sure.
So once they're there, they become a little bit more vulnerable and trusting.
It's interesting because as a divorce practitioner, I have to tell you that I wish that the people who get divorced and they make that decision and that's the option that they choose, that they would also stay in some kind of communication because communication is really the key in raising your children, right?
Absolutely. If two people cannot communicate within a relationship in itself, they're the foundation. So if we got a crack in that foundation, everything else is going to fall and your kids are going to emulate exactly how you communicate, right? We always see that.
Right. But it's interesting because if you could get to the point that, yes, the relationship is over in terms of being married to each other, but you're going to respect your children enough to be able to say, hey, we have to be able to communicate to be able to raise healthy children. I think that would be an interesting change. But you know what? The same is true in your marriage counseling. If people have gotten to a certain point where they're communicating and then they're doing these checkups or these regular ongoing visits, it puts them in a position that they can then still communicate and be a good role model for their kids.
Absolutely. I think that co-parenting, even if you're not married at a certain point, or even preparing for that before the divorce decree is finalized and, kids are being separated, figuring out how they want to co-parent moving forward. I'm a big proponent of when I work with families, I'll always bring the parents in separate from the kids, whether it's in the beginning or the end, or sometimes both, and just remind them, what, right now, this isn't about you guys and your marriage. This is absolutely about the health and well-being of your kid. I need you to respect each other enough to respect your child.
Right. Absolutely. One last question I have is really focusing on this last year. A lot of people, some people are suffering economically from the pandemic. Some people have lost loved ones. The pandemic's affected everybody and probably in so many different ways. What would you say to people? Has it been especially hard year? What should they do? Should they look at life differently? Is this short term or are there things that we need to do to be able to manage that crisis as well?
Well, I think there's so many variables and factors in just what constitutes being problematic to an individual. That could be themselves, their family, their job, their self-esteem, their social anxiety. For kids, that's a huge thing that we've seen throughout this last year is just the social anxiety and then the isolation. Then they get comfortable with that. And now we're reintroducing them back into the school system. We're reintroducing them to public settings and a lot of them are experiencing a lot of anxiety. Even adults are doing that at this point. So it kind of depends on, what your specific issue is in general. But I think that looking at this, COVID's not necessarily going away anytime soon. None of us thought it was going to be here for a year, which means any of the issues that you kind of were going into COVID with are probably either still lingering. Hopefully some of them may have gotten a little bit better, but some of them have also been exacerbated as well. So for those situations, I definitely think that getting in contact with your primary care physician, getting in contact with a therapist, or utilizing your resources, your social support network, figuring out what you can do to better yourself in these situations too, because I think we're kind of in that limbo right now of, we're coming out of winter and transitioning back into spring and summer, which is going to elevate mood, but then some of those issues are still going to be there.
Sure. Yeah. Just because the times change doesn't mean the underlying issues aren't there. Well, we
Exactly.
certainly appreciate your time. We're going to give your contact information to and others. You know, if you're listening, you can reach out to Caitlin. If you have certain questions there, you can reach out to us. And, you know, getting that first step, it doesn't have to be with us. It doesn't have to be with Caitlin, but you know, if you're listening today and you feel paralyzed and you feel like you're stuck in that process, take that first step. Get to a good counselor, get to an attorney, start taking the initiative to move forward with your life. Because that really, it's up to you what you do with it, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Very good. Thanks for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.